Hello, guys. This is the history class. And as you know, this is a flipped classroom, so you are supposed to see the whole video and then at school we are going to do some exercises. If you have any questions about this class, you can ask the teacher too. So, let's begin with this class with the two teachers talking about a part of the Brazil's history. So get your notebooks and let's start.
Good morning, good evening, and good night. Today, me, Professor Charles Edward, and my friend Matthew, we're going to do a flipped classroom about the arrival of the royal family in Brazil. So, why did the royal family came to Brazil? It happened in 22 of January in the year of 1808. And in that day, the royal family arrived at Salvador, Bahia, and started to command Brazil and Portugal from here, their biggest colony. Okay, so first things first. Now we know when the royal family came to Brazil, but why did they came to their colony and abandon their real country, Portugal? So it happened because in that time, Napoleon Bonaparte, the biggest and most famous French empire, was conquering the whole Europe, as we can see at this map. So why he was doing that? And his main objective was to make a economical bloc with England, their biggest enemy. So if he couldn't conquer England by troops or invading their country, he would make them fall by economic ways. So his plan was to make the whole Europe stop making business with England. And if any country in Europe kept doing business with the British, he would conquer the country and would start to domain and command the country. And that was what happened with Portugal, because once they were a big ally with England, they didn't listen to Napoleon and kept doing business with them. So what happened was the obviously Napoleon invaded Portugal and started to command their country. And once the Portugal army wasn't half of what the French was and didn't have a good leader like Napoleon was, and the royal family and the king at the time of Portugal, Dom João, knowing that and knowing that if Napoleon was there and they didn't run away, they would be arrested and gone to jail. With the help of English, the royal family abandoned their real country and came to Brazil, their most big and rich colony in the time. So, with the arrival of the royal family in Brazil, several things changed in the life of Brazilian, Portuguese, and all the people who used to live in Brazil in that time. For example, it was created the first journal in Brazil, the Gazeta of Rio de Janeiro. This journal was created using the machinery that was brought with the royal family in Brazil. So now, here in Brazil, we had the capability of making our own journal using machinery and all this kind of stuff. Another example was the creation of the Botanic Garden, a place where Brazilian plants would be protected and kept in safe, and having a really big area to grow up and being exposed to people who wanted to visit and see all the plants that our country had. Another important thing that the royal family did in Brazil was the creation of roads that connect all the country in one single road. Something that didn't exist before they went to Brazil. And that was really important because now it was much easier to make business and to communicate with other parts of the country. Like, for example, someone in São Paulo can now, in a much easier way, communicate and have business with someone in Bahia, for example. Because now, with the roads, messengers were faster, business was faster, everything was faster, and that was something really important, the development of the Brazil in that time.
So, to fully understand the impacts of the coming of the royal family to Brazil, it is necessary to understand the situation that Brazil was politically, economically, and culturally beforehand. Brazil was what is called a colony, being able only to do business and economical transactions with Portugal. That meant that Portugal would control all the prices of the sellings and buyings, being able to make Brazil sell products with a really underpriced price, while Portugal would always sell products to Brazil with an overpriced price. But when the royal family came to Brazil with help of England, England itself would start to make a really big effort. So Brazil would finally open its ports and technically get out of the situation of colony, as England was really looking for new economical instances to open up its markets to all the world. When it started to get really hard, Portugal finally opened up the port of Brazil, getting out the situation of colony and letting Brazil have a more independent economical business, even though it was still really dependable in Portugal and now principally in England. England, with the influence that it had on Portugal and its business, would always have really big advantages in business with Brazil. For instances, more sellers in Brazil and business persons that were English would have even more advantages and tax advantages than Portuguese themselves. With that, the economical influence of England would really rise in Brazil. Not only that, but the opening of the ports and the coming of the royal family to Brazil, as previously mentioned, started a really big cultural in the country. That would meant the opening of the first journal of the country and the first theater and also the first library, having really big impacts of the most elite population of the country with more refined cultural events now. It would also impact the situation of the country politically, as after the Napoleonic Wars were over in Europe, Portugal king would decide that even though Brazil was not more necessary to stay in, the Brazil would be the center of its empire and decided to stay in Brazil. Unfortunately for him, in Portugal, a revolution called the Porto Revolution started. The revolution would threaten the power of the royal family in Portugal, and that meant that the Portuguese royal family would have to come back to Portugal. But of course, that would not be completely true, as the prince of the time, Dom Pedro I, would stay in Brazil and rule here as its principal manager. Of course, that would make a really big political influence, as Dom Pedro I was not the most adorable person in the country. After a long time, that would impact the independence of the country of Brazil from Portugal, being announced by Dom Pedro I itself. Portugal, of course, would not, as the king's son, would be the emperor of the new empire, the new Brazilian empire, would not offer a really big problem with it, as long as Brazil would pay for its independence and its view of Portugal as independent. That would meant that basically the whole world and principally Europe and its countries with business partners that would be important to Brazil would also view the country as independent itself, changing forever the history of Brazil.